Now, without further ado, Brandon Blankenship will be telling us more about this event. He's our assistant professor in the Department of Criminal Justice and also as associate faculty with the Department of African American Studies, as well as the pre-law director and UAB mock trial team faculty advisor. So welcome. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Well, thank you guys for being here. Let me just tell you a little bit about this event and what we're doing. This is an actual class. So this is the trial advocacy class at UAB, and it's a special type of learning called experiential learning. So it's taking the textbook and actually bringing it to life in the real world. And rather than tackle just a regular trial, like you might see on, like I've been watching some the trial that's going on right now. Rather than watching a trial of a person, we're actually putting mass incarceration on trial. Now this is a special type of trial that we're doing. It's called a showcase. You won't see, for example, all of the evidentiary exhibits being entered. You won't see a lot of objections. And the reason for that is because we're trying to focus on advocacy. When I have a position that I'm trying to advocate, what is the best way to do that? And how do I do it through story? So what you're going to have is you're going to have the students that are going to be doing that. I'm not going to introduce the students because you'll hear them introduce themselves throughout the event. I am, however, going to introduce one of them as I introduce the witnesses. These students over the course of the semester have interviewed people across the spectrum of mass incarceration. They've interviewed a former director of the Department of Corrections for the state of Alabama. They've interviewed incarcerated persons. They've interviewed formerly incarcerated persons. They've interviewed families who've been impacted by violent crimes and other crimes. They've interviewed mental health practitioners, trying to get to the bottom of the understanding of what role, if any, does mass incarceration play in our society, in our communities. And it's been a fascinating thing to be a part of. I appreciate the fact that they were willing to go on this journey with me. It's scary, right? It takes great courage to do the work that we've been doing, and so I applaud them for doing it. Let me introduce our witnesses. One of our witnesses is running late and may not make it, so in the event that she's not here, Reed Walker will be playing Angela Harris, who is Anaya Blanchard's mother, responsible for Anaya's law. So if the pronouns are confusing, that's why. Reed will be playing her. Also, we have Dominic Bales here, a former corrections officer and a current law enforcement officer for the city of Tuscaloosa. Ronald McKeithen is here. Some of his art is featured over in the exhibit. If you have an opportunity to see it, please take that opportunity. He could have his own exhibit. His work is fantastic, and we are greatly honored, Ronald, that you're here. And Scotty Colson is here from Jimmy Hill Mission. Two witnesses for both sides. This exercise started with, let's bulldoze all the prisons on one side. Let's build more prisons on the other side. It has transitioned from those two very hard positions to pro-prison and pro-reform. And that's what we'll get to hear tonight. So if you're a witness, if I can ask you to step out into the hall there or into the Zoom room, I will yield to Judge Bales.
Good evening. I'm Olivia Velez, and I will be your judge for today. We are here today to hear the case of pro-prison versus pro-reform. I prefer to be called Judge Velez, and I will likewise address you by the name that you introduce yourself to the court with. Pro-prison, are you ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please proceed with your introduction to the court.
We are pro-prison. My name is Sawyer Jackson. My co-counsel is comprised of Haley Smith, Maddie Kirkpatrick, and Cameron Belsa.
Thank you. Pro-reform, are you ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please proceed with your introductions to the court.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Juana Leonard, and I'll be your attorney tonight, along with my co-counsel of Sarah Liddy and Jessica Islami. We are your pro-reform.
Thank you. Pro-prison, please proceed with your opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. Prisons. A form of punishment we have had from the old world and the modern world. Now, you may be asking yourself, why prisons? Prisons have a problem currently. They're out of date, 50 years old, or even 60, and so on. They need to do their job, but we have an overcrowding problem. That problem completely defeats its purpose. Rehabilitation isn't even happening. Moreover, there are individuals who are in prison that shouldn't be there, but that is not a prison's problem. That is a justice system problem. The prison is meant to rehabilitate and confine those who have committed a crime. I stand here today for prosecution to ask for a better prison. A prison that actually does its job. Creates programs like mental health. Mental health in the form of doctors. I also ask that we build a better prison that has a drug rehabilitation program that these prisoners are forced to go to. Otherwise, they won't go. Today, I have two witnesses. My first witness, Officer Valles. He was formerly a corrections officer for 3 years. He served on the CERT team. And you may be asking, what is the CERT team? That team has been corrections officers in the state of Alabama, every prison. Now, my second witness, sadly, is Anaya Blanchard's mother, Angela Harris. She lost her daughter because the justice system couldn't do its job. But she still believes in a prison to confine and keep those who have done violent crimes. I yield my time.
Thank you. For reform, you may proceed with your opening statement.
Thank you. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for being here today. Before we begin, I want to help you picture a time when you made a big mistake. What are the consequences of that mistake? And how do those consequences shape you as an individual? More often than not, we can agree that learning from our mistakes has helped us actually have a positive impact on our behavior, helped us grow as individuals. Now, I want you to imagine a time when you've made that same mistake. But instead of learning what you've done wrong and learning how to fix your behavior, you're thrown into a small 6 by 8 foot room with a small corner toilet with a random bunch of strangers with no chance of getting out, and you're stripped of your privacy and your rights. Is that how you want to be treated? Will that help you improve your behavior? Well, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that's exactly what our criminal justice system does to people every single day. We determine the purpose of our criminal justice system is incapacitation is through retribution, deterrent, and most importantly, rehabilitation. However, that's exactly what we've lost sight of. People do make mistakes, and crime is inevitable. However, because the criminal justice system is so focused on the incapacitation aspect of that it neglects the rehabilitation and actual self-improvement to help others become better individuals. Which is why that we propose that by taking alternative routes, instead of just doing the incarceration method, and dedicating it to actually helping individuals become better people, the rehabilitative services and intervention programs, it'll actually help us fight the prison rate and prevent overpopulation. Should an individual decide to partake in these alternative routes and rehabilitation programs, they'll be enrolled in a 4-step process dedicated to helping them prevent future crimes. The first step would be separating these people into based on the severity of their crimes. Then we move on to actual rehabilitative and therapy methods, then on to education and life skills, and then lastly on returning into society and reintegration. In making this argument, the defense counsel does understand that there are people who deserve to be in prison because some people do pose a threat to our society. And your safety is our number one concern. However, not all crimes are worthy of jail time, And not all crimes should be punished by losing one's livelihood, especially for some offenders. First of all, you'll be hearing from Mr. Ronald McKeithen, who was sentenced to life in prison for a minor robbery. But fortunately for him, he participated in a series of outside rehabilitation and intervention programs, and he only served 30 years of his sentence. Now, he has dedicated his life to helping improve the lives of others through rehabilitation programs. He's also an artist, and as Dr. Blankenship mentioned, a lot of the pieces you'll be seeing in the exhibit are done by him, showing that these are people who are behind bars. These are not just numbers. These are people who have feelings and desire to create. It also alludes to the inhumane conditions that prisoners continue to experience every single day. You'll also be hearing from Mr. Scotty Colson, who helps run a halfway house on the Jimmy Hale mission, a rehabilitation program dedicated to helping inmates and people get back on their feet. These are both two people that have actually demonstrated the positive impact these programs have had and shown that these are actually a benefit to our society. Now, the pro-prison side will try to tell you that prison is the only way and the best way to keep us safe. We argue that's not the answer. There are other ways to combat this. And there's alternative routes that you can take to actually keep and maintain a better and safer society. Join us today in our belief that prison is not always the answer, and that there are other ways that you can take. Thank you so much. I give my time.
Thank you. Pro-prison, you may call your first witness.
Dominic Velez to stand. And for my attorneys, if y'all can just make sure you take an extra step away from the owl camera, so that way we get all of you in.
Could you say your name for the courtroom
Yes, Dominic Velez,
and your occupation?
currently a Tuscaloosa police officer, formerly a state of Alabama correctional officer.
At what facilities have you worked at in the state of Alabama?
Being on CERT team, I've worked every prison within the state of Alabama, including Limestone, St. Clair, Holman, Donaldson, etc.
Could you describe some of those buildings?
Some of those buildings were up to date, well staffed, very secured. Some buildings were severely understaffed and completely outdated and broken down.
And could you describe some of the inmates they house?
They house a variety mixture of low offender inmates as well as violent, life-serving inmates as well.
And they're together?
Yes,
And have you seen low offending inmates turn violent in prison?
yes,
Would you say that's due to being housed, its environment?
yes, definitely due to the environment and adapting.
So would you say that building more prisons would allow for the separation of these criminals?
Yes, with more facilities, they'd be able to house a lot more low offender inmates together and probably keep them away from more violent offenders.
And why did you leave being a corrections officer?
They established the BCO program, which hired lesser trained officers, which made the environment dangerous for officers and inmates alike.
So it was hiring more officers with lower quality training.
Yes, ma'am.
So would you say that the quality of the training of a corrections officer matters more than the quantity of corrections officers?
Yes, ma'am.
So with more facilities, with not necessarily more corrections officers, but better trained officers,
Yes, ma'am.
would that create a safer environment?
I believe so. I've seen less well-trained officers secure, larger populations rather than just, less trained officers who are unfamiliar and with the environment pretty much handle the same situation for them.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Does pro-reform have a cross for this witness? You may proceed.
Does the ADOC separate the prisons? Is there at level 1, which is minimum security, to level 5, which is maximum security?
On paper, they attempt to, as far as their housing, no.
But in practice, that's not done.
Yes.
Okay. Do you believe, would it be correct to say that we build more prisons, you think there will be more officers, more COs? Will building more prisons fix a staffing problem?
I believe so.
Can you elaborate?
Yes, ma'am. With more facilities, I think you know, if you separate low level inmates like that have less violent tendencies, especially when you start building more programs that they start to go to. You know, some officers probably would feel safer starting there and working there and getting more familiar, and they would have the option to either go to max camps or stay exactly where they're at.
Do you feel like having more correctional officers makes prison better?
If they're well trained, yes.
Do you feel like building more prisons will help officers become better trained?
I believe it's a possibility, yes.
If we don't have enough correctional officers now, how would we get more?
I can't answer that, ma'am.
Did you see inmates come into prison and then return in your time as a corrections officer?
Not my time span, no.
Did you see drugs in prison?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you see corrupt correction officers?
I have.
No more questions.
Thank you. Officer Velez, you are excused.
If I can make a quick, just make sure y'all speak up as well. Thanks.
Pro prison may call their next witness.
Your Honor, we would like to call Angela Harris to the stand. Ms. Harris, I just would like to thank you for being here today. I know it's a touchy subject, and I'm sorry that you have to be today. Could you state your name for the court?
Angela Harris.
Could you tell us about what brought you here today?
So an individual named Ibrahim Yazid took my daughter away from me.
Could you tell us that story?
Yes. So Anaya, she's my daughter. So Anaya was a happy, fun, loving girl who smiled and could brighten up any room. And she was taken away too early 2 years ago in October 2019 from Ibrahim Yazid. So Anaya, she was hungry one night at around 11:20 p.m., went into a convenience store to get a bag of chips. And she walked out of there and she was walking to her car, and Ibrahim kidnapped her, took her car, drove to Montgomery, and when they found the car 20 miles away from Montgomery, they found a lot of blood in the car. And I'm one of the top sexual assault nurses in the state of Alabama, and they said there's a lot of blood, but I've seen blood before, so I've worked in that kind of environment. And so I had hope that she was alive, but about a week later, they found Anaya's remains after they found the car the week before. So a week later, they found Anaya's remains behind a church.
Could you tell us a little bit about Anaya's law?
Yeah, so Anaya's law would allow a judge to deny bail or bond to any violent repeat offender, such as Ibrahim. He was on so many counts of he had violent assault charges, attempted murder, multiple counts of that. He was charged, but he was never convicted. And he was somebody that should have been locked up and never put back on the streets. He should have been locked up and, yeah.
And he was given bond.
Yes, he was.
That's when he committed this crime.
He was given bond, and if he wasn't given that, my daughter would still be alive.
Do you think that he was given bond due to a justice system issue or a prison issue?
I would say justice.
Do you think that our communities would be safer if individuals like Yazid were kept incarcerated?
Yeah, if he was locked up, I mean, there's no way he could have gone out and done this again because he had way too many violent offenses on his record to be out there doing something like that.
Could you tell us a little bit about how this whole entire situation has impacted or changed your life?
Yeah, so with this happening to my daughter, I've been able to I have a new purpose now, which is to help other people that have been in my same position and help them get through things. I go out and talk to people, like I do public speaking now, and talk about this injustice system that didn't lock away this individual.
Thank you. No further questions.
Does the reform have a cross for this witness? Yes, sir. You may proceed.
Is it correct that you told the jury that Ibrahim Yazid had committed violent crimes previous to the murder of your daughter?
Yes, that's correct.
Is that in January of 2019? The one most recently before Anaya's murder.
Correct.
And he was allowed out on bond. Is that correct?
Yes, he was.
Okay. Do you think the existence of more prisons would have changed the outcome for your daughter?
I can't say for certain. They probably had room. They just chose not to let him stay locked up. They just chose to let him go.
So you think it would be fair to say that this was a failure on the part of the judge for giving him bond and not a failure of the Department of Corrections?
Yes, I think it's 100% on the judge.
No.
Thank you. Ms. Harris, you are excused. Pro reform, you may call your first witness.
I would like to call Ronald McKeithen to the stand. Hello, Mr. McKeithen. Could you explain to the jury why you were incarcerated and how long your sentence was for?
I was convicted of first-degree robbery and sentenced on the Habitual Offenders Act. And because of 3 nonviolent crimes, it was enhanced to life without parole. I served 37 years.
And where were you incarcerated?
Donaldson Correctional Facility.
Okay, could you explain the living conditions while you were incarcerated?
It was overcrowded, a lot of hostility. I slept in a dorm with 126 beds, 4 toilets, 6 showers. The rats that took over, roaches. It was like, it was crazy. You would hear about stabbing probably every other day.
How capable would you say that the staffing at Donaldson was?
Lack of staff. The dorm I lived in, they didn't even have an officer in the cube to watch guys. Said somebody get to fighting, who's gonna come help them? And they started locking the doors so you couldn't get out. They just had 2 or 3 officers be at a shack at the end of the blacktop. You had some good officers there, a lot of good officers, but you had the bad officers. And sometimes you wouldn't be surprised to see a guy getting beaten, and other officers that having to help it. That's probably the best I can say about the officers.
How would you describe their training?
The training, a lot of cadets would come through. And when they finally get the job, a lot of them would quit. We didn't really have a lot of professionals there. Most of those are retired. And the young ones, they were just, I don't know, doing whatever the other one would do. If they get around a bad one, they're gonna act like a bad one. We never see them training, but we hear them shooting their guns. We see them running around, the new ones running around the camp. But one thing we know that they always tell them is not to trust us. Don't believe nothing that come out when, if our lips are moving, we're lying. And so some of them coming out with that perception. A lot of them come in and like, if they meet a fool that's violent and talking crazy, they'll start treating everybody else like he'll treat that guy. It was unpleasant, constant being looked at like, you know, from a third world country or something.
So when you came and spoke to our class, you said that you had over 100 certificates of various programs that you graduated from while you were incarcerated. Could you just give us a brief description of the classes that you took?
Yes. I was always kind of curious. I loved school. And because of my grandmother, I had took a GED test. Didn't know I passed, called home. She was very happy. And then I knew I could make her proud by giving her certificates. So then I got my barman certificate, my commercial food certificate, and just started taking classes. Next thing I know, I was hooked. That became my sanctuary. The best classes, the one I most loved, was those from Auburn University, as well as UAB.
So what other types of programs were offered? You mentioned some educational programs. Were there any other types that were offered there that you didn't get a chance?
Well, we had a lady named Connie Cola, who started a class called Body Health, where we were able to make a podcast about the ailments, different ailments that guys go through in prison. None of us knew how to write or even create a character. By the end, we did something real special. We're proud of.
So with these programs, how available were they to prisoners? Was it something that you had to seek out to get into, or were they like?
They were available, but they weren't encouraged. Oftentimes, we would have to go through a lot of difficulties just to get to class. And then each class can only have 25 students. And a lot of guys in prison, then kind of gave up about taking classes, thinking they're going to help them get out. Because for so many of them, it doesn't. There was a friend of mine that done Jimmy Click, did 32 years, not one disciplinary, and just got turned down and set off 5 years. And guys are seeing this, and hope is low. And why should I go to a class? But me, it kept me from going crazy. You know, the more I learned, the more I realized about myself, the more I involved and just was able to reinvent myself. So I had to keep going, even though I thought I was going to die.
So is there anything in particular that you would try to fix about these classes, make them more available? Is there any easy solution?
Create more classes, allow more access, create an area that is specifically large enough for this place so that staff from the colleges can just create an office and just have something going there. Instead of just, because some guys like, sometimes the class can be too short. And when you finish one, we have to wait a little while to get another one. And you've got many guys that would go to college if they're allowed. I mean, actually go to college and get a degree if, you know, it was allowed. But most guys never like parole. They stopped us from being able to do that. And so now there's not much to do. If you ain't got your GED, that's it. You can't take a trade.
And then also when you're in class, you mentioned that if you believe that if you had like sports activities with your school, that you don't believe you would have went down the path that you did. So what early intervention programs would you like to see in towns such as your hometown?
I would like for them to invest more in community centers. I would like for them to give more access to, say, groups of kids being able to be exposed to, say, Sanford, UAB. Then I would like more police involved. Because, say, I'm from Titusville, and it's a dangerous place. And, you know, the police come when something happens. But I've been through Hoover, Vestavia, all those other places, and I see the difference. And they need to change that. And
So do you believe that if you had had some sort of program to be involved with, instead of hanging out with your friends? You
I had a
believe you
program, I had high school.
Yes. Do you
I
think-
loved high school. When I went to Parker High School, I thought I really entered a college. But my mother was an alcoholic. A lot of times I would have to stay home and take care of my siblings. And it seems like the principal didn't understand why I missed 31 days. And I tried to explain, the next thing I know, he wants to get two guys to hold me and hit me with some kind of stick. I wasn't going for that. You know, if I would have just submitted, but I didn't feel I deserved that. Because he didn't really understand, he didn't want to accept or listen to what I was going through at home. And so it's like, the hell with him. I just left.
No further questions.
Does the pro-person have a question for this witness? You may proceed.
Good evening. Mr. Keithan, you stated earlier that you were heading down a kind of rocky path before you went to prison. Is that correct?
Yes.
So would you say going to prison and, change that path?
Me and a number of guys have battled with that question for a long time. A lot of guys would say that prison saved them. And I can honestly say that it saved me. Because if I hadn't went to prison, that spiral I was going down would have went deeper. I started using drugs, actually using syringes. For about 3 years, it's just everything just went crazy. I started finding myself getting crazy cases, Yeah, prison saved me.
Prison saved you. So would you say that you came out of prison on a better side after all the programs and things that you went through?
I came out of prison a totally new man. I can hardly remember the little guy that walked through those gates. Sometimes I can think of the things that I've done and just see how stupid it was. And I'm glad I'm not that person anymore. I can't say that it was my plan to change, but it just started happening.
And you stated that prisons were overcrowded, correct? Would you say that building better facilities could alleviate that overcrowding?
No. I'd admit that prisons I've been in, they're ragged, they're falling apart, but they can be fixed. Getting a larger prison is not going to solve the problem. It's just going to put money in other people's pockets. There's not a prison I can say that I've been in that I liked, but there's some I've been in that I was able to adapt and plant a seed that could grow. I'm not sure this will happen in a new prison because these new ones they're trying to build is too much separation. I think they're trying to make it like those up north where you got a buzz and just you don't have really that freedom like say we have here in the South, the ones that are now. I think it would damage things and give them too much control.
But wouldn't you say that separating higher level criminals from lower level criminals would create a safer environment?
Yes, in a sense. Those young individuals you're talking about, usually they're banded together to take a step from those older ones. But also you got to look and be a learning experience because you got a lot of older inmates that are teaching young guys that are being an example for young guys. It was older guys that created Youth Connection, a gospel rap that young guys just cling to. It was older guys that was like creating classes that the young guys respected and would go to. But then there was a lot of older predators too. But you should separate them, but at the same time, you should blend in those that are capable of teaching them and making them change their ways and keep it away from those that might harm them.
And you also stated that the prison programs are beneficial, correct?
Yeah.
So the expansion of prison programs would help those in prison, correct?
It would.
No further questions, yeah.
Thank you. Mr. McKeithen, you are excused.
Thank you.
For reform, you may call your next witness.
I would like to call Sari Paulson to the stand. Hello, Mr. Paulson.
Yes, please be seated. First one you have.
So, where are you currently employed?
Jimmy Hill Mission,
And how long have you been employed there?
3 years.
All right, could you explain the programs that are offered in this facility?
Jimmy Hill, for 75 years was your basic hot and a prayer, and we've, in the last 3 years, expanded to include continuing care. Continuing care is the process where after you finish a 4-month intensive drug alcohol program, that then you go into a 1-year program of job training, GED, getting ID, and things of that nature.
And how accessible or like well advertised is your program? And what does the process look like for these men to get into this program?
It is well known in the community. The new process that we're doing is a little bit less well known, so we're trying to get that out more into the community. But drug courts, diversion courts, other shelters know what we do now.
And what rough percentage would you say of these men that come in are formerly incarcerated individuals?
Directly coming from incarceration, about 1/5. Those who have been incarcerated, at least in jail, would be 100%, and in the state prisons would be probably 75%.
Okay. So have these men expressed difficulty of reentry into society after being released from prison?
That is a major issue with them. One of the issues we've been working on, for example, something as simple as ID. When you go into prison and you come out, usually all of your information has been lost or is no longer in date. And it is a major issue before you can start getting them, job training, sign them up into schools, sign them in training programs, to find the ID. Simple things such as birth certificate, social security card, and then a driver's license or government issued ID. And the state has passed a law to maybe, hopefully make that easier, but they passed a similar one 4 years ago and it didn't work.
So you would, or what benefits have you seen from people who have gone through your programs in terms of reentry?
The benefits we have is each class that comes in consists of 15 people. And we're starting this in our women's program also. So you start out with up to 15 people. You do the 4 months, and then we're early enough in the program where we've had very few that have gone through the entire year of continuing care. But for the ones who've been through for 4 months, we're seeing a 60% graduation rate. This is, when, to put it into perspective, a good graduation rate from a drug treatment program, alcohol treatment, addiction program is 30%. Basically, Major League Baseball, if you hit 300, you're doing great. We're hitting 600 right now.
Wow, that's incredible. So what would your thoughts be on first-time offenders, nonviolent offenders, going into some sort of rehabilitation program opposed to serving a prison sentence?
In my previous life, I was with the City of Birmingham Mayor's Office, and I was in on the setup of the first drug court here in Jefferson County in the 90s. It is, from having worked with that and then all my experience working with substance abuse programs here in town as well as mental health, the diversion from the system is very, very critical, particularly for first-time offenders.
minor offenders. Once you get into the system, it is very difficult to get you out. Keeping you out requires first they want to have to keep out. You know, even if you're there on drug court and have the threat of jail hanging over your head, you still have to want to. But we see the same success rate, and I think locally with other programs, you see the same success rate with people who are required to go through a substance abuse program as a condition of sentencing as people who voluntarily come.
So what are your thoughts on early intervention programs to bypass this prison and rehab altogether?
Early intervention, I mean, it depends how far back you go. Early intervention to me starts at preschool. It starts at elementary school. In this town, we've extraordinarily cut youth sports in the last 10 years, where there's very little that is offered inside the parks and inside community centers. That was one thing that was increased in the 90s when we had another significant increase in violent crime here in the city. That was one of the things that worked. You're not seeing that. So the diversion of young people has to be key, because once you reach the point where you are addicted, once you reach the point where you've become acclimated to making your living off of an illegal way, it is very difficult then to turn you around. It's much easier. It's like diverting a comet coming towards the Earth. It's much easier if you can hit it 10 million miles away than 100,000 miles away.
So what you just said, back in the 90s, you had to implement more early intervention programs to decrease crime rates. Do you think that would still be applicable today?
Kids are different. You didn't have the boxes that kept you quite as entertained as today. But there is still a basic interest in doing things. And all the time I've ever worked with children, that my children and all the children I've worked with over the years, is that there is a basic need to feel that you are protected. There's a basic need to feel that you are part of something and growing into something. When they lose that, when they don't have that, that is when a child is more likely to begin spinning off into different directions.
And what are your views on the current rehabilitation programs already implemented in prisons, if you have any input?
Sometimes there are programs there that if in the individual prisons, each prison is different. Not every prison has the same programs. Some of them have fairly good occupational training and fairly good access to junior college programs. But you also have some who are not. Now, sometimes those programs are very limited too. You have to earn your way into it. There's no problem with that. But even with that, the size of the classes are limited. And then also based on the exigencies that may be happening in the prison, the classes may be interrupted because of discipline issues, lockdowns, and things of that nature. So they can be helpful. They are helpful to some people, but it's a tough environment to learn in.
So in your opinion, how do you think building new prisons would either hurt or help the rehabilitation programs?
I think it does both. Okay. Some people need to be in prison. That's just the bottom line. And when you're in prison, we have to realize that you are getting out at some point, by and large. So when they come, so that they can then begin looking at their life. If we can do things within the prison, for example, GED programs, psychological counseling, violence reduction programs, things of those nature, that does give them a leg up. But the buildings themselves, building them, in Birmingham, we built almost all of our schools here in the city in the last 20 years, and the scores continue to go down. People continue to leave. It's not the building.
No further questions. Thank you.
Does ProPrison have a cost for this witness?
Yeah.
You may proceed.
Mr. Colson, there's no requirement for the individuals to show up to your program?
No, it is a completely voluntary and free.
Do you think that if better programs and things to help them when they are released were implemented inside the prisons, they would do better since they mandate them?
Yeah, and here's why. If you come to us at least with an ID, then that means a counselor spends less time trying to get your paperwork set in order. And once your paperwork is set in order, then the counselor has an easier time of being able to help target your educational, your training, your counseling needs that you will have. So yeah, that it can be easier if they come out with some training and some counseling while they've been in prison. It actually is much easier if that happens.
And if they do these programs while they're in prison, and they could rehabilitate themselves and get paroled quicker?
That should be the way it works. That should be the way it works. You know, keep in mind that the prisons are, particularly if prisons go to a commercial model, are paid by people who are in there. So there's very little motivation, financial motivation, to move people out of prison if there's a financial incentive to keep them in there if you're operating the prison. And even with non-commercially operated correctional facilities, there is the idea of you need to keep it full, otherwise you'll see your budget cut.
So what are your thoughts on, like, do you think there's enough room in our prisons to implement these programs that they need?
The new prisons, as I've seen the design, will be better suited to do that. But once again, it gets to, if you're going to simply have a larger box to fill up to the point where they cannot do anything and move or present real programs, then that really means you've just got a bigger box, not a better box. If that makes any sense. The building of the prisons themselves, you may have the facilities in there. When our prisons were built that are now obsolete, they were state of the art. And when I was in school here at UAB, we studied those prisons, and some of them had things that were state of the art. We did nothing for 40 years. So therefore, what was state of the art is now simply a relic. And with the new prisons, it doesn't take long for something new to become full and dysfunctional.
So they just need to maintain them.
Not only maintain, but if it doesn't matter how often you clean, maintain, make stuff work, if it is more people in there, then can be effectively dealt with.
No further questions.
Thank you. This concludes the taking of evidence in this case. Next, we will move on to closing statements. Pro-prison, are you ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please proceed with your closing statement.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Your Honor, may it please the court, you must go with what works. You've heard two stories today, but one thing that we have that they do not have on their side is history. Now, in no way are prisons perfect. They never have been, and even after we implement everything that we're advocating for, they still won't be perfect. But building better prisons, more adequately staffed, will be a step in the right direction. Now, all the information you've heard today is complex. I'm sorry. Is this good?
Yes.
All the information you heard in today's case is complex, but everything that you need is simple and it's right in front of you. The other side advocated for early intervention programs. And this is good. Nobody will deny that. This is a criminal justice system issue. It does not address the issue that we're here today for, which is corrections. Our solution does. And our two witnesses show you that and can tell you that a lot more clearly than any of us can. Number one, Officer Velez stated that the two main problems that he saw working in throughout all prisons of Alabama were staffing and space. He clearly stated that building better prisons more adequately staffed with this staff and the space would, one, eliminate conflict between the inmates, which would make for a better, a safer environment for the correctional officers. But also, it will eliminate the staffing issue because he stated that the number one reason that there is a staffing issue is because the correctional officers are just scared. They feel like their facilities are not good enough for them to be able to do their job in a safe manner. Our second witness, Angela Harris, stated that prisons are the early intervention, and unlike the programs that opposing counsel advocated for, it has teeth. You cannot go anywhere. You have to go. You either have to go there or you just sit in prison with no hope of your sentence being reduced at all. Now, I want you to pay specific attention to the first witness that pro-reform called, Mr. Ronald McKeever. He clearly stated that the main problems that he saw in prisons, also the same ones that we're trying to address, are the facilities and low staff. Both of these will be directly addressed by building more prisons, as I just stated, and having the correct amount of staff, but also adequately trained staff. He stated that the classes and also having better access to the classes will also eliminate a lot of the problems that we see in prison. Now, in today's case, we ask that you side with pro-prison to better equip and staff our prisons to make for a better environment for the correctional officers as well as the incarcerated people inside. Thank you.
Thank you. Pro-reform, do you have a closing statement?
Yes, I do.
You may proceed.
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, through the presentation of these expert witness testimonies, it is clear to see why we need this reform. Our criminal justice system is so singularly focused on the punishment aspect of justice that it's not focusing on the prevention of future crimes. While it is true that prisons do have history, the rehabilitation programs have progress. In the short time that they've been implemented, it has shown we have results. As Mr. Colson said, they're batting 600. We are seeing great results with these programs. And as Mr. McKeithen stated earlier, that prison did change him, but because of those programs, he's actually able to reintegrate into society. Prison may have put him there, but he actually took the steps to get out. It is living proof that if people actually take these steps and put in the effort into getting out of prison, then they'll be functioning better members of society. Ronald McKeithen didn't let the English of his past dictate his compassion for his future. And Scotty Colson helps with other people transform their lives, people who've made these mistakes, help them shape them into better individuals and being able to actually improve society. Officer Velasquez recounts the prison conditions of prisons. And yeah, there is overstaff, there's understaffing. These overcrowding issues could also be solved with more rehabilitation programs. If less people actually stay in these prisons and actually put in effort, then we will actually have more positive results over time. Angela Harris's mother, Angela Harris, and Ida Blanchard's mother, also discussed that no one should have to lose the anguish, the pain of losing a child. However, it was not an issue with the actual prison system. It's actually an issue with the criminal justice system of actually keeping those who belong in prison in prison. It wasn't the actual issue of the size of the prison or anything like that. It was actually in keeping those individuals who should be locked up. He was not going to actually put in those steps to become a better individual. The people who do belong to their society should stay there. But those who actually deserve a second chance, like some offenders, and those who have been predisposed to crimes with their past histories, should actually have a chance and take steps to become better individuals. Our criminal justice system is so focused on should be designed to keep us safe and to keep us safe and protect us if we've done wrong. But it can't do that by just simply locking up everyone behind bars. Which is why we ask for these rehabilitation programs, these early intervention programs that Scotty Colson mentioned, these education programs, people can actually integrate society and help get back on their feet. We believe that if someone will work for another chance, they deserve that second chance. The prison system is, and then with an outdated and obsolete prison system, they will not be able to actually help us achieve a better, brighter, and safer future. We need reform. It's clear, and we need it now.
Thank you. People of the jury, you are charged with reaching a decision in this case. You have heard evidence from both pro-reform and pro-prison. You have been asked to decide to build better prisons with improved staffing, or to invest the money that would be spent on better prisons on community programs that help people stay out of jail in the first place. In making a decision, you must abide by the following rules. You must consider the evidence you heard during this case. You may consider any reasonable inferences from the evidence you have heard during this proceeding. The burden of proof in this case is the preponderance of evidence. When I tell you that in court that what he or she is trying to prove is more likely to be true than false. This is sometimes referred to as the burden of proof. I understand that you have elected T. Marie King as your jury foreperson. Please begin your deliberation.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
All right, my fellow jurors, we have a heavy lift. But let's take a quick assessment of kind of seeing where everyone is. Those who are, just show of hands, who's leaning towards pro-prisons? Okay. Show of hands, who's leaning towards pro-reform? All right. Anybody kind of 50-50 right now? Okay. All right. Would anybody like to share kind of why they picked the side that they picked? Yes.
Since just thinking like mass incarceration on trial, I liked how pro-reform talked about the initial steps we can take to keep people out of prison in the first place, which would lead to less overcrowding and thus less mass incarceration. So that's why I side with that.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? Any thoughts? Anything that stood out to you that led to your current? Yes.
Having worked for a shelter previously, what the, I don't remember his name, what the fourth witness said was accurate. When you build bigger prisons, it's almost a necessity to keep them full in order to stay staffed and budgeted. And so that kind of gears people towards more getting people in prison as opposed to, and for lesser offenses, as opposed to, you know, helping them be better in the first place and actually rehabilitating.
Thank you. Yes.
Kind of building on that point, I was really moved by Mr. Carlson's statement that when our prisons were built 40 plus years ago, they were state of the art, and that buildings don't make our system better, programming does. I will say I was kind of confused because it seemed like the prosecution, because we're calling them, or the plaintiff, that they were saying that programs could be mandated in the new prisons, but all that they're offering is increased funding for buildings and staffing, right? Nothing beyond that.
That's kind of what I gathered from that.
Okay.
Yes. Anybody else that you feel different about what you heard from the pro-prison side? What about somebody who was pro-prison? What are your thoughts? Yes.
It seemed that implementing more of like a reform inside of a prison, like helps impact more people in the prisons rather than like a reform beforehand seems to affect only those with lesser criminal charges.
Possible. Yes.
Can I ask a question to that point?
Yes, you bet.
Kind of like I was saying before, but that side's not advocating for programming. They're advocating for funding, for building and staffing, right?
Correct.
Okay, I just want to make that clear. I think there's kind of the lines muddled.
And I think we kind of saw that. I think sometimes attorneys kind of take that leeway of kind of, blurring the lines a little bit. But I think, you know, our witnesses did a good job to kind of really lay out from their experience, you know, from what I gathered. I don't know how everybody else feels. What about our virtual jury? Has anybody from the virtual jury has any thoughts or?
I have not seen any.
Okay.
Yeah, no comments so far, T. Marie.
All right, thanks, John. Anything that was, what about the comments from our witnesses? Was there anything else that stood out besides Mr. Colson's comments? Yes.
From the witnesses, I apologize, I cannot remember the names. The one, that was incarcerated, he said that being in prison changed his life. That those programs he was able to go to, and he was able to get those certificates and all that. By raising a teenage child now, you have these programs out there. But a lot of times these children don't want to go to those programs. They want to be on those Xboxes. They want to be on the internet. They want to be watching the things that can put them in the opposite direction of where you're wanting to go.
Yes.
I also feel like what Mr. Colson said about there are people that need to be in prison, and I feel like that's not going to change. So, I mean, like she said, it changed Ronald McKeithen's life, and it could change more people's lives. If there are, I mean, it's not like we're not going to have, like, never going to do away with prisons. Like, we're always going to need them.
Right.
So making a better environment where it could change somebody's life.
Okay. Yes.
But just to like the broader point, I think from his testimony, what we heard was that sitting in a cell didn't change him. It was engaging in rehabilitative programming that changed him.
So looking more at those programming being available and reformative. Yes, sir.
I know it was mentioned that in the course that we have some prisons that are state-run and not for profit and all that. Why would we ever have a prison that's for profit? I mean, the purpose of a prison is to get somebody off the street that is causing harm to society in our way of life, what we accept as normal. If we send somebody to prison for violent crimes, murder, or whatever, yes, they should be incarcerated and probably never let out. But when you have people who are thieves or drug addicts and stuff like that, we can reform them. That should be the purpose of prison, is a reform to return them to society as productive citizens, not just keep them locked up forever.
Yes. Yes.
Gonna be a rough car ride home tonight.
Jury can't help with that piece, I'm sorry.
Our issue is this. When a company comes in, with my background is in business, not in prison management, but in business. When a company comes in and they come to the state and they say, guess what, guys? We've got a formula that we can run your prisons for less money than you, the state, trying to do it all on your own with your own group. And so the state says, hey, I got to look at what my tax, people pay taxes. They're going to love me as the governor or whoever if I say, look, I can save you all on your tax dollars. We're going to go with company X because they manage prisons. But now you've incentivized keeping these prisons full. And the very people that are managing the prisons and can speak to a prisoner's behavior while they're in there, as far as possibly going up for parole or something like that. Well, if I speak good words about these guys, and the next thing you know, they're able to get out. Who am I going to have to fill that bed back up? Because I can only imagine that in a business situation, any company, you get reviewed. I don't know about lawyers, but the rest of us get reviewed every year. And based on what you've done, I get a bonus. I get a raise. Okay. So for me, that goes directly against kind of what my husband is saying about putting people in prison and attaching a profit to it.
I'd rather see them reformed, put back into society as productive members, which will lower my taxes anyway.
That's a good point. But then we also heard from Mr. Ron that, programming being cut, wanting to participate and be a part of the programming, but the prison preventing that as an option. Did I see some other hands?
I was gonna speak to that point. If we're actually putting the money into the programs and into the people who run the programs and making them more effective, you are gonna make the prison rate less and have more productive members of society, which is what she's saying. If you're lowering the number of people in prison, you're also lowering your profits. And that's, a bigger building is not gonna help that. You need to invest the money into the program, into the people, to make those who want a second chance, to make those who want to do better, have that opportunity to do so.
That's good. In the back. Go ahead.
Obviously, it's no secret that the justice system and the prison system are both screwed up. How many years has it taken us to get where we are now, where everybody's accepted and we're still fighting for it? Thankfully, like my generation has opened a lot of people's minds, and I think right now, justice is always going to be fought for, but it takes a lot longer. So why don't we focus on building more prisons that protect the offenders, less crowded, less violent, also helps the staff step up and do what they want to do, like pursue being a corrections officer without being scared to death. And as far as like, we have enough money, as much as they take away our tax money, we have enough that they just spend it on stupid shit that doesn't matter instead of focusing on society and protecting everyone.
Yes.
Sorry, just a clarifying question again. This is not prison like we're not abolishing, like the defense is not abolishing prison, right? So I think it just sounds like from some of the comments, some people might think that we're saying we're for prison or not. The question is funding for programming, funding for a new building, right?
So it's to build better prisons with improving staffing. Is that correct, Yana?
Yes, that is the prosecution's claim, and the defense claims that we should invest the money that would be spent on building these prisons into community programs to help people stay out of prison in the first place.
Just wanted to, like, I think it sounds like from the comments that we're a little confused on that. And then another thing I wanted to point out, it sounded like to me that Ron McKeithen, the formerly incarcerated individual, was not engaging in programming offered by Department of Corrections. It was offered by, he mentioned, UAB professor Connie Kohler. It was programming offered by people in the free world going into the prisons. It wasn't funding by DOC, Department of Corrections. And so I just wanted to throw that out there too, for anyone. It sounds like some people might be thinking that funding that's going towards prison is going towards programming. I just wanted to kind of make that distinction.
Any other thoughts? What about what the officer said? Did that stick out to anybody? What about Benai Blanchard's mother? I'm sure we all have somebody in our lives that we care about. We all have Anaya's. But we all have runs also, don't we? Yes.
I was persuaded by Ms. Harris saying that the problem likely, or that she attributed the issue that led to her daughter's tragic death being the justice system, not the prison system. And I think that distinction is really key for the issue at hand.
Okay. Yes, sir. That's your hand up.
I guess I'm looking at each person that may be guilty of something or being incarcerated, for whatever case it may be. Each of these people are individuals. And I guess it's like in my business, I manage many people. And I have to look at each individual and kind of play to what their personalities are and what their motivates them. And money is not always a motivator for people. Some people it is. Some people it's recognition, it's being recognized and respected for what they do and treating them like they would want, like you would want to be treated. I think sometimes when we lock people up, we just want to throw away the key and not treat them like human beings. You know, they're guilty, so obviously they need to be locked up. It's like counterculture today. If somebody makes a mistake, we're supposed to ruin their lives and they can never work again because we don't like what they said. That's a little stretch, but just because somebody makes a mistake doesn't mean that they're not worthy of being treated like people and given opportunities to redeem themselves. And this guy's an example. How many more are there that we're not reaching that we could reach?
Do you have any virtual comments?
Yeah, T. Marie, we have one comment in the chat from Les Smith, and they say these prisoners don't know that they need rehabilitation before they get to prison. They will not attend courses in prison.
Thank you. So let's see where we are. Yes.
And sorry, there's a little bit of lag. I have another person on the virtual event that would like to say something.
Hi, my name is Audrey Tigner. I am one of the criminal justice professors at UWA here in Livingston, Alabama. I wanted to kind of talk to the rehabilitation courses or the courses that they take in prison. There is a new-ish program called MRT. It's the Moral Recognition Therapy courses. So this goes through anger management, parenting. I mean, it just goes the gambit. But one of the best ones that I know of is called Living for Good. And it is a program that they can take, and it actually gives them all good time so that they're able to get out earlier when they actually do take these courses. So I do know that they may not know when they get there that they do need those rehabilitation courses, but it does them a favor. So helps them not to recidivate later on. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. You get awesome. So the defense side was saying we have option to vote towards to invest the money that would be spent on better prisons on community programs that help people stay out of prison in the first place. So we're talking about being proactive with our funding. Where are we on that as a group? Are we in favor of this? Was this proved? Do you feel like you can return a verdict in favor of this? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Just to make, I'm coming in with a clarifying question.
Come on.
So the defense is advocating for programming but also programming during incarceration, right?
It's saying to invest money that would be spent on better prisons to be spent, well. Okay, what is, go for it.
The argument that the defense was making is that we could use, or that they could use the money that is being spent to build these new prisons to take care of reformation now. I know that in their opening, they had mentioned something about a process to help, low-level offenders get released because, honestly, using the example of Ronald McKeithen, he was sentenced to life in prison for a robbery, his entire life because he stole something. So they were saying, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they were saying that they could implement a process to help low-level offenders like Mr. McKeithen be able to leave prison early. And I believe they were also advocating for early intervention programs as well as rehabilitation programs in prison.
Okay, thank you, that was helpful. And to that point, I will say, I think the prosecution actually made a really good point in the closing about how the issue at hand is not early to your question, to their point, I don't think early intervention touches on the issue here. I think that's kind of irrelevant. I think that was a really good point that was made, as far as if this money should go towards, like, it's a correct, I think he said it's a corrections problem. And I agree with that point. But I am pro-programming and guys are, I'm still defending.
You got a virtual?
Yeah.
Yes. Virtual question?
John, you're muted.
There had to be at least one.
You would think I would have learned by now, but Annette, I'm sorry I don't remember exactly what your first comment was referring to because it was several minutes ago. But Annette says, however, we heard that mentoring does occur. Can this also be focused on and formal training for our guards? And then Annette makes another comment. Says, sounds as if fixing prisons might be economically a good idea, but logistically may be challenging.
Thank you. I thought I saw a hand. I was just checking back. All right. So we got it. You guys know. Yes.
It's not a question. I would just like to touch on what was said. The former correctional officer, when he said that there were a lot of under-trained officers, you know, you could build prisons, but, you know, how are you going to staff these people? Like, you know, are you going to train them better? Because them being power hungry is a problem too. Because the West would have become dehumanized in prison. So is it going to be anything, you know, to better that? Because I don't see that changing anything if you're not going to train these people to treat these people like people. No, I see that being a conflict as well.
Going back to that, the officer also said by having these prisons that can separate and have the newer officers in training or in the lower level of the crime, you know, and then they can get experience and learn and progress and then possibly move on up. And that would cover your learning and your experience and your training.
Okay. Yes.
You also said that the lower level offenders are they're supposed to be separated in prison, but it's only on paper. Once the prisons get full, they're gonna do what they have to do. And they're gonna fill them up and put them all back together again. If they continue to fill them for the purpose of, you know, making money or just because they have to be filled or because there's no program or anything for them to do outside of just going to prison.
Yeah, and to that point, I think she's right, because when you mix them all together, the lower level offenders with the really egregious offenders, these guys start getting trained in that type of thought. The ones that are lower level offenders come out first out of prison than they were before because there's no programs to rehabilitate them and get them going on the right path. Some of these guys that go to prison, there's no hope for them. I mean, they just finally got caught, you know, they're very egregious or violent people. But if you mix them all together, you're just going to get a mess coming out.
Yes.
And with the same concept here, with it being then mixed in together like that, you have the lower levels, you know, coming out more violent, and that's because they're having to protect themselves. If you're not keeping them separated, I mean, they're going to be aggressors in there. You know, these people go to prison. It's not always a time where someone goes to prison and they're like, well, I'm in here now. Let's just, you know, be more violent. You have some people who want to go in there and actually do better and actually have that time to reinvent themselves. And then if you mix them together, you have two different types of people. You know, eventually someone will be like, I am tired of you bullying me. I am tired of you messing with me, trying to fight me. And then they become aggressive. I mean, you should keep them separated. That's the whole thing of it.
If I can interject, particularly for you guys on the back areas, just make sure to project for the people in the Zoom.
I think the first one was not quite as loud as the second time.
good.
Awesome. Okay, so we all get it that there's some folks who do things that go to prison that are violent offenders, and we believe that they should be there. We also seem to believe that rehabilitation should be an opportunity too. If folks want to change their lives, want to do better, they should have that opportunity to do that. Then why not just start from the beginning and have programming that folks can actually start getting into when they're younger, and just have access to kind of be, some people call them diversion programs, just activities to kind of give people another place to put their energy. All of those things are possible. Our task at hand, however, is to make a decision based on either to build better prisons with improved staffing, or to invest money that would be on community programs and rehabilitation programs to lower the number of prisoners, and recidivism rates, and impact early diversion programs. So that's what we're faced with. So let's take another vote. So if you are, show of hands, for to build better prisons with improved staffing, show your hand. Okay. If you're for investing that money in programs, community and rehabilitation programs to lower the number of prisoners and recidivism rates with early diversion programs, raise your hand. Okay. Your Honor, may I ask you a question?
Yes.
Do we need a unanimous decision?
No.
We do not.
All night.
I think I was looking at my clock. All right, so it looks like we have more in favor of investing that money into community programs.
We also need to do the, John, do you have a proposal for the vote for the Zoom?
We had one hand raised for each of the two options.
All right. Well, it seems, Your Honor, we have a decision. It looks like the majority of our jury, Your Honor, is in favor of investing money in community programs and rehabilitation programs to lower prisoner numbers and recidivism rates.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you all for your service and your time. Have a blessed evening.
Before you go, let me thank you. Let me thank you very much for coming and participating. A lot of thanks to John and to Christina for this awesome facility and letting us participate in this facility. I want to, you might have noticed that I did not introduce T. Marie King in the beginning of this, and so I want to make that part of my close. You had the honor of working with T. Marie King tonight. She is a crown in the crown. She's a jewel in the crown of Birmingham. Every time I'm around her, I just learn so much. And there are times when I'm faced with a hostile conversation, I stop and ask, what would T. Marie do? I try to channel my inner T. Marie. I want to end with one reflection for you guys, something to take home. Think about what we just did. Reflect on what these students have been doing since September. They took a very difficult question, locking people up, and they wrestled with it, and they didn't shy away from it. And kudos for the courage to actually talk to people and have difficult conversations. And kudos for the courage to come here tonight and actually have this conversation with us. But what I want you to really reflect on is this. I want to encourage you to reflect on. We didn't have any personal attacks tonight. We just talked about an issue. We voiced different opinions. Some of us thought some things were important. Some of us needed clarification. It was so much like a real jury. It was crazy, right? But we did that without any hostility whatsoever. And I don't know about you, but I came a little further down the road about my thoughts about mass incarceration and incarceration, period. I haven't quite gotten there. I don't quite know where I am on all these issues. But going through this process helped me move further down the road toward the truth. So thank you for being here. And I just ask that you would take that with you as you go home tonight. Oh, absolutely.
Where's it going? First of all, thank you so much, Brandon and John, the team here for inviting me out. Thank you to you all, the students, for taking the time to engage in this. As somebody who does social justice work and deal with these topics all the time, yes, I agree. It is beautiful to not see people jump down each other's throats. I don't know if that was because y'all were on camera or I'm not really sure what the motivation was, but I appreciate that. But the only thing I wanted to share is something that I hope we dig deeper into, just as in society as a whole, is learning to be more empathetic. And I think that's a muscle that we can spend a lot of time to invest more time in growing and strengthening. And a lot of times people confuse empathy and sympathy, and empathy is about being able to see things from other people's point of view. And you probably at one time or another, or you may have heard somebody say one time or another, if I were you, I would. You've heard people say that before? Your girlfriend do something that's crazy, that you knew was going to be crazy, that was not going to return good results, or whatever. And it's like, well, if I were you, I would have. And we take that position. Sometimes we're being comical. Sometimes it's from a place of pride. And we have to remember that if we were them, we would be dealing with their point of view, the resources, the knowledge, the experience, all of the bias that they bring to the table. They're not seeing things the way that you do. And unfortunately, we live in a society where we live with a justice system that hasn't had its best track record. It hasn't had its best track record. It has a very dirty and dark history. It has a lot of good people that work in it, though, who are faced with daily decisions of how to conduct themselves, how to police others, and just if we can build that empathy muscle. So if we ever faced with being on a real jury, or if we choose to actually go ahead into law, that as we're doing our work, let's not think about the numbers as people do when they think about building prisons, but let's think about the lives, the people who we're impacting by our choices, by our words, and hope that we can create a world that's better than the one that we inherited. So thank you all as a jury for participating. Hopefully you take this experience with you and share it with others so that we all can be a little bit more empathetic.
Never. Thank you for participating. Good night.